everyone. This is the SIG-Auth meeting for April 27th, 2022. We've got a pretty full agenda, so I guess we can get started. Tim, are you on the call? I don't see him. Well, Jordan, you're probably the next person I'd ask.
Yeah, there's not a lot to say beyond the title. The desire was to take pod security to GA in 125, barring any new information. I think the main reason we didn't take it GA in 124 was mostly around getting experience reports from people transitioning from PSP to pod security. And I think Openshift has at least gotten that underway, so they're aware of what's involved in that. And GKE is in a similar spot, so we have like documentation and processes sort of set up so we understand that. There haven't been any new reports of performance issues or bugs. A couple usability improvements that we thought of that we'll probably get in, but nothing that changes how the feature is used. So the proposal was to take it to GA in 125. If you have comments here would be great, or in Slack or the mailing list or the enhancements issue.
Just figured I'd say that, yeah, we've got a proof of concept of how the transition works. We know how the fields function. We know where the pain points are, but it looks like the choices made are correct and they are just pain points. So looks good to us.
There's Tim. Your timing is impeccable, Tim.
Sorry.
No worries.
We decided we're gonna have to rewrite it all and just push it out like 6 or 7 more years. No, I'm kidding.
Don't kid, because it's hard to tell. David, I was going to ask, I think Christoph had mentioned that Standa had been doing some of the work around the PSA transition for OpenShift.
Yeah.
Do you all have any artifacts or anything more specific, demos or anything like that that you would be interested in sharing?
Standa has a design, it's public, about how we're gonna transform SECs into these particular labels. There were some changes required along the way, so new clusters and upgraded clusters are gonna have slightly different existent rules, and the way they're likely assigned because of changing defaults over time. But other than that, I can get them to come over here and link the design if you like, of how we're going to do it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
You want to tag
I don't.
Just so we don't lose track of it.
What did you just say, Jordan?
Oh, it'd be helpful to like tag people into items in the agenda if we wanted them to add a link or a detail or something.
I'll remember Standa's email and tag him.
Tag me, I'll get him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Fine.
All right, cool. As an aside, does anyone know of any API like SEC that folks are migrating off of? Like, I don't know exactly how the internals like OPA and stuff express their policy. Like, I know it's regular, but more common use cases.
Yeah. To be clear, we aren't migrating off of it, right? It's going to be the both coexisting together. They provide slightly different powers.
All right. Anything else? on this? Tim, did you have anything to add?
No, I think there are still things that we could do to make the transition from PSP a little easier. I think the time has passed for doing any of that in tree, but there's opportunity to automate some of the tasks with out of tree utility. The other thing that comes to mind is I have some concerns about the AppArmor policies, but I don't think that should be blocking GA. Specifically, we allow all localhost AppArmor policies, which makes sense for SecComp, since the SecComp policies need to be in a dedicated folder that gives pods access to them. In the case of AppArmor, any loaded policy is accepted, which includes policies that are loaded for system daemons. So there's no way to like limit that to policies that are explicitly granted for pods in the cluster.
Is that a deficiency in anything we've done, or is that just a deficiency in how AppArmor is expressed?
I would say that's a deficiency in how we've specified the the restricted, or I guess maybe also baseline pod security standards.
Is there something we can do that's different, maybe before we GA?
I think one way of approaching this would be to, I guess there's kind of two ways I can see going. One would be to only allow localhost profiles that have some predefined prefix. And just say that if you want to if you want to add a profile for the cluster, it needs to have this prefix. The other option would be a deeper change, which would be refining how refining the semantics of how localhost profiles actually work. AppArmor is still beta. There's some discussion about bringing it to GA, and I've raised this on that KEP as something to think about in the transition of AppArmor to GA.
So AppArmor is still specified in annotations, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that, so is there an issue tracking some of those considerations? Might be helpful to.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned it on the AppArmor to GA discussion. I'm not sure if there's a separate issue for it, but I can follow up on that.
Okay. The backwards and forwards compatible approach we've taken or come up with for pod security seems like it would let us make changes to the latest versions of these pod security standards if they were necessary in the future. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's
okay.
part of why I don't think this should block.
Okay. If you could open an issue or specifically mention these issues in the AppArmor GA issue and link to it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, will do.
And the only other in-flight change that I'm aware of is the pod OS field, which lets pods indicate what operating system their containers should use and can make portions of pod security standards relevant or not relevant. So one of this is set to go to GA maybe in 125. I can't remember. But the plan was to, at the point when that field goes GA, let pods which say, I'm a Windows pod and I am explicitly running Windows containers, let them omit some of the Linux only fields. So that cleans up those pod specs and would actually let the restricted policy relax a little bit and not force Windows pods to set Linux specific fields. So again, that would be a change we could make in the future. I don't think that blocks GA, and that actually encourages me in terms of like being able to maintain this feature over time. Like if new fields show up in the pod spec, we have a way to sort of fold them into this policy when it makes sense. All right.
Looking at the project board, the only other thing we had on here is clean up the API and package layout. Basically an internal code cleanup if we want to consider those stable interfaces once it goes to GA.
Does anyone have anything else before we go to the next item? All right, so I don't think Max is on the call, so maybe we can skip this. But before we do, I guess, Jordan, do you have any specific concerns about a REST API built into the Kubernetes API server that echoes back your identity?
I'll try to jog your memory. Years ago, someone at Google had a concern that if a token was given to a user and someone was able to say, who is the identity of this token, it would give them more information about an otherwise opaque token than was originally intended by the system. Now, I think this came from GKE about 6 years ago, and I don't know if those reservations still hold, or if maybe I'm even misremembering. It was a very long time ago.
I don't know. In general, I think the declarative, not declarative, the non-persisted type endpoints are a little weird. So I would want to make really sure we wanted to add another one. I don't have a lot of context about exposing information from the authentication layer back to the user being a problem.
Okay. Openshift does have a user tilde, and it gives you back who you are, which has been pretty useful.
Yeah, that's basically the ask. Is that functionality in OpenShift is very useful, both just for normal users and development and stuff to understand that you're working as the right identity before you perform some action. You can already learn the username associated with a token by trying to perform some arbitrary spaghetti action that RBAC will deny, and it will say you can't do this, but it won't tell you anything more than the username. So basically the ask is, would it be all right for you to be able to probe the system for UID groups and extra, which you can already probe with your username. Tahir, I see you unmuted. Did you have any thoughts?
I'm not sure. I know Google does have so like our typical OAuth method, if you're using a GK cluster, is to use a Google like OIDC token, an opaque one. But we do have a, like, I forget the oidc.googleapis.com or something like that, where you can, OAuth.googleapis.com, where you can submit your token and get back some information about what's contained in the token, like the identity asserted by it.
Is it like the OAuth introspection endpoint or like the OAuth user endpoint, one of those?
I don't think it is. I don't know what the technical term for it is in the standard. I think it's just like for debugging purposes. But as far as I know, you can take any token that you have and send it. We do have some more like advanced authentication features that might be blocked. Like our tokens can be bound to certain virtual networks, and then they're invalid if they're submitted from outside that virtual network. I'm not sure if maybe that is, but I don't think that existed 6 years ago. So I think probably realistically, we're going to track down Mike. And
Okay. That's fine.
he's out of office until tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate. Did you have anything else for him?
No, I'm just, like most things, we should think creatively about what could be abused and then ask, like, is that realistic, or could you do that, the equivalent of that already via some other mechanism today already? Yeah.
I don't recall any issues in OpenShift in the entire time that the feature has existed there.
But we never had tokens that functioned across clusters, right? I mean,
Right.
That's true.
so like I bring it up not because I want to stop it. I bring it up because I think there was a legitimate concern, and I want to be sure that it's no longer valid.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Those tokens are co-located with clusters, so you can't.
Go to the cluster.
Sorry, bro. Okay. Well, hopefully we can track down Mike and ask. All right. I will move on to the next item. So this came up in triage meeting on Monday. I just wanted to ask folks' opinion. The gist of this issue is that the Kubernetes controller manager performs health checks against the API server. It is not configurable on what health checks it may or may not may decide to skip, since you can pick. And so, as a for example, if you're using something like KMS, it can, and you don't filter out the KMS health check, it can take a long time before your server is considered healthy, the API server. In this case, they just disabled the KMS key, which is obviously not going to work out too well for them. But I think the gist of the question I had was, would we want to extend the configuration of the kube controller manager to support filtering what health checks are or are not performed? And sort of related to that is like, is that the best approach? Is there some better approach? That, to me, this sounds like a relatively generic issue that, as a for example, if you have a load balancer in front of your API server, you can decide which health checks you want to perform by configuring your health cheat code. But it seems kind of annoying to have to copy paste basically that same configuration to every component. Maybe that's fine.
Do we have context around what prompted the addition of the controller manager doing the wait?
I don't remember about this guy, but I do have memories of why people have tried to do it in the past. So there were in configurations where a load balancer is not used and the QAPI server starts up and the kube controller manager starts up. The QAPI server, if you don't check to see if it's ready, can serve incomplete discovery data. And the incomplete discovery data had an impact on the way garbage collection functioned, as well as which controllers would be enabled or disabled. And so in the very distant past, I remember somebody asking to add this check to solve that problem. It also solved the problem where if every single API server endpoint is unhealthy, then many load balancers will just start round robining all of them. And this lets you know.
Yeah, the discovery.
Isn't that
one that
thing you, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the incomplete discovery was the thing that seemed most relevant. Like you kind of don't want your controllers starting up because they make decisions at startup time based on what APIs exist.
Yeah, so what I was going to ask is, in regards to that, how does this work when you have multiple masters that might be different versions with different APIs?
Interestingly, it was valid at one point in time versus if you never check, then you can be in a state where where the API server knew it was never valid, right? So imagine if you hit discovery before CRDs have been loaded. Doing that can cause you to have incomplete information in your GC graph for block under deletion, right? Like, was it bad? It's probably not terrible. You'll fix yourself eventually. But, what breaks in the meantime? I think similar things could happen for namespace cleanup, but I'm less certain of that because I think it does a recheck. It's been a long time.
Yeah. So would we want to make this configurable? A good idea?
I don't know that I find myself with strong opinions. Do we actually support like exclude this check via the health of the endpoint, or is it configured on the QAPI server? Exclude this check.
It's a
Passing
parameter
parameters.
to an endpoint.
Okay.
It's a very strange design. It does not look like the rest of our APIs.
I would be curious what doesn't go well in the controllers if the server it's talking to is not ready, and whether the controller can react to it. Because this is a point in time thing. Like this is I'm going to wait to start until this thing is healthy. If it goes unhealthy later, yeah, I wonder how many of our controllers have things at startup time that maybe this is band-aiding over, and if it would be better to improve those, I don't know, instead of like adding more knobs here. I'm curious why this is in SIG-Auth too. Like this discussion, like isn't this more sort of API machinery?
Yeah, I can bring it up there. The reason it's in SIG-Auth is because they were talking about KMS specifically.
Oh, specifically KMS. Yeah. I don't know. Like more knobs just seems like I'm sure there would be someone whose life would be made better by a knob here, but it seems like most people's lives would be made better if we could just make the controller. If discovery was the only thing we cared about, like are there specific health checks we could look at that say like are the things involved in discovery done setting up, or if there are specific things at startup that we could make more resilient so that like the things dependent on discovery would wait until discovery was ready, and then once it was ready they would start up. I don't know. It's at least worth asking the question, like is there a way we could improve this so we don't need the knob?
It's also worth remembering that I only have my narrow window of why was this originally added. I don't know what else depends on it now. So discovery is something I know this got added for, and we actually improved other aspects since then. I mean, you rewrote GC discovery and made me review that monster. So, but I don't know what else is there.
Do folks want me to take this to like SIG-Auth machinery and just see what, if others have different contexts? We can maybe see maybe the next step on this.
It's fine with me.
Okay, yes.
So that check used to only try to complete a successful discovery call. And then that issue had it switched to calling health Z without a lot of explanation. So
Good. So we can keep discussing this. Let's see, Margot, are you on the call? Let's see.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to talk about this? This is nowhere near big enough. No, it's good enough. Go for it.
Basically, this is like proposed addition to the exec credential spec. So the exec credential plugins kind of need caching so that they can be at all performant, but caches, can be subject to time clock skews. They can cache something that then gets invalidated. Just any number of reasons that then your, for example, your webhook token authenticator does some sort of check and realizes it's not valid anymore. Then today, the kubectl can retry the exec credential plugin, but if the plugin doesn't have any way of knowing that it's being retried, it might just give you the same invalid cached credential. And so this proposal is that there should be a Boolean field within the exec credential spec to let the plugin know that it's being retried as the result of an unauthorized response. So I guess the open questions of like, does this feel like something that people would be on board with adding? And if so, would it need a cap and would it need to be gated? Questions I have.
this reminds me of the thing we had in the V1 Alpha 1 version, where we were passing down some information about the request or the last response or something. I think it was the status code of the previous response.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see if you had gotten like a 403 or a 401 or something, I forget. And the plugin could use that information to make decisions. And so that was only in the alpha. It wasn't exactly clear like how plugins were expected to use that. I think we were maybe envisioning something like building on top of that. It's almost like a Kerberos kind of like challenge. Like you're going to need information from the previous invocation plumbed down to you to do a thing, and that never really materialized. I think giving plugins information they need to make smart decisions is reasonable, especially cases like we have right now in Tree, like the service account tokens, where you can say like, I get a token and it's good for an hour. So in the absence of other information, like don't call me again for an hour, or like this should be good for an hour, but they're revocable. So it might start failing. It'd be nice to not fail for an hour in the meantime. I think it's probably worth a design. A Boolean might be too simplistic. Like you might need more information, like some timestamps or some, maybe even the status code of the last request, or like, I think more information might be needed, or at least it's worth asking if more information would be needed. So a small design, I think, is useful. But I don't know, what do other people think?
It would be awesome if Kube Control had some built-in or recommended, it could be a built-in caching functionality or a recommended caching pattern or something, because I think at least based on my experience with the GKE plugin, like I think every credential plugin is kind of rolling their own caching layer right now, because it turns out that they're all super slow.
I mean, even if they're not super slow, right? You can't fetch new credentials on every application, because then you just double the amount of network requests you need to do for every call. It's just really not practical.
Yeah, for us, it's like we didn't know where to put the cache file, so we were like, we'll maybe put it next to kubeconfig. How do we figure out where kubeconfig is on every system, on Mac, on Windows? We don't know. Kind of like bodge some code together. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
You could make your own directory in like .config.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the problem is like we don't know what this, like on Linux, we know what the standard is, right? There's like a XDG, super complicated, and read these environment variables and that environment variable and this other environment variable, and that'll tell you where you're supposed to put your cache files. On Windows, who knows, right? Like, will it work if the user has relocated their home profile to a network share? I don't know what all kind of weird stuff people do.
Yeah.
So we thought put it next to kubeconfig is pretty safe. But yeah, like I'm sure that we are also affected by this problem that Margot's describing. My 2 cents is it would be great if there were more support for caching tokens, whether that is documenting where you are suggested to cache them, or kube control caching them, or something.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I'm trying to think of what we could do.
Both of those seem like related problems, but probably different problems. And
Yeah.
I think like this is useful independent of whether like more caching capabilities are added on top. So I think if we're like sort of talking about the whole life cycle, like not just how do I get a credential, but how do I get a credential even once it's been invalidated, or how do I get a credential and not make everyone roll their own caching layer? Those are good questions to ask to build on top of this feature. I think I'd probably ask them sort of separately. I mean, if there's one solution that like easily solves both, that's fine, but I wouldn't hold this up on adding a built-in caching functionality.
Okay.
In terms of, especially if the caching, I would expect there to be more of a handshake, because like a plugin that is counting on kube control to do some built-in caching stuff would maybe behave differently if it knew that it was talking to an old kube control that wasn't going to be able to cache anything. And so there, I think you would need more sort of like kube control indicates to the plugin it can cache, so then the plugin like, skips its own internal caching. Whereas this is more just sort of additive information that I think we could probably send somewhat unconditionally once we are happy with the design.
So in relation to that, so I'm hearing yes, let's write a CAP so that way we can, talk about the details and go through any pros and cons of different approaches. This is not a REST API, And I am unaware of a mechanism within client Go to like feature gate something. So would this just be a thing that just happened? And it's probably very benign to send extra data in an NVAR.
I don't know. We could consider like how confident we are in the approach and what the risks are. If there's any risks, we probably want to make it opt-in, but you could opt in when you set up the invocation to your like auth plugin. Like if your auth plugin knows how to respond to, force refresh or this thing was stale or whatever inputs, then you could indicate that when you configure your auth plugin in the kube config. No NVARs. Oh, God. But we did similar things with I think the standard in handling, like plugins that expect to be able to consume standard in could indicate that in their configuration. Like I require standard in, so if anything else in the kube control invocation use standard in, like don't even call me, just like fail because my auth plugin requires standard in. Or I'd like it, but if you can't give it to me, that's fine, invoke me anyway. And so like we have patterns for indicating capabilities of the auth plugin in the configuration.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything on this specific proposal? Margaret, do you have questions for me?
That's it. It seems like there's a lot there, but a lot of interesting related things. But I can already kept for this, and we can kind of discuss different ways to convey this information there.
Yeah,
So,
if I could make a suggestion, I'd probably start with just the issue in the enhancements repo and sort of the motivation paragraph of a KEP. Like there's a lot of stuff in a doc. If like I would start with just sort of the motivation and like the 3-sentence version to start getting feedback and attention and agreement that here's the crisp problem and here's what we want to do, and then we can fill out details.
Okay. Yeah, so just sort of like kind of the first 2 paragraphs here or something similar, just to get discussion.
Yep.
All right. From the load, we can do a thing. It's freaking out because it's really big. As an aside to the last one, I was going to ask a related question. Do folks like to hear? I know you have to maintain one of these things. Do any of y'all have a desire to plumb through log level from client Go to the plugin?
I'm sorry, I missed to plumb through what?
Log level. So like if you do kubectl get pods, dash log level equals dash v equals 100. Like if it's the reason that get pods isn't working is because your plugin is broken. Like you don't actually get anything out of the invocation of doing it verbosely because the plugin doesn't know that you're trying to do it verbosely.
I think that would be helpful in our specific, the GK specific case. Like we're shelling out the G cloud, so I guess we could pass, like do a further pass on of like up G clouds verbosity level, so you can understand exactly why it is taking a minute to get your credential.
Do we like log timing stuff on invocations of exec plugins with hypervocity?
So we have their debug wrappers wrapped around all of that stuff that does timing if you have it at a high level.
Okay. I'm super sensitive about like adding logging to things that are handling credentials and like accidentally making them start spitting out credentials. But if you're wondering like where am I spending all my time, and that is not clear with hypervocity, that it says this call to the API server took like a minute, but really 50 seconds of that was like invoking this auth plugin process and waiting for the result. Like we should at least include that sort of timing information, like, hey, I'm invoking this binary and then I got the result and this is how long it took. We should definitely record the fact that that's happening and how long it's taking if we're not today.
Yeah, I don't think it's granular on that piece. It's like basically the whole round trip. So yeah, that could be an enhancement, like a minor enhancement to the existing exec plugin stuff. Yeah, I can see you being wary about accidentally causing credentials to be logged. Granted, your plugin should not do that at any log level. So just refuse to log out your creds. But you know, I can see that going awry. Okay, we got 15 minutes left. Rohit, are you on the call? I don't see someone by that name. Look at the. I do not know. David, did you review this whenever this doc was created? This sounds like a thing you would review.
This is related to QADM, right? So
Is it?
I thought I saw QADM. I normally skip over QADM ones, figuring they tend to review their own. But so no, I haven't looked at it.
Okay, well, you can add it to the triage bucket of piles of stuff to look at. It's fine. Christoph, Cuba Proxy?
Yes, so I don't know who remembers it, but we had a discussion about handing Cuba Proxy over from a private repository to SIG-Auth. So David took the time to review the code with me, and we had kind of two lists, one pre-acceptance, one post-acceptance. And yeah, I think it was really cool to do that. We found a lot of topics that need some attention. And also David wanted a second reviewer.
For a couple points in particular, the actual transport configuration that's set up by the Cuba proxy was not something I was expecting offhand. And then the actual single host reverse proxy, I could use some assistance looking at those two areas. Yeah, Jordan, I see you. Look, I took the other 10,000 lines. It's like 10 lines.
Yeah, dude, but single host reverse proxy is like a demon.
Single host reverse proxy with custom transport configuration set.
Oh, wonderful.
That do not match Cube. So.
But David also suggested try to take over some of the logic from Kubernetes.
Yeah, I you know, this repo is old, so I don't know what the state of the world was when it was initially written, but over the years, the auth code has become much more consumable.
And the API server code as well. So setting up transports, handling server creation, automatic reload of serving certs and keys. I have several of those things on the pre-acceptance list. Just to understand what we have and have something uniform. but those questions about the proxy and the transport themselves, I am looking for someone who is willing to help look at those aspects.
Cannot promise that I will have time, but I am willing to look at it. I spent enough time in the not too distant past working on reverse proxies to have some context for where they go wrong.
So there's also a pull request open on which we had discussions. So maybe it might be useful to look into the pull request and get some context.
Is that linked in the SIG-Auth agenda, Krista?
I would need to take a look, but the issues, all the links within the issues are links to review comments, basically.
Okay, that's cool. All right, so the next step is basically another set of reviews on the items that David wants us second pass at, and then this list, we're saying that all of these items must be completed along with any new findings from the second review before SIG-Auth accepts the project.
Yeah, those are the items that I would want fixed before I would say, yes, I'll take ownership of this repo. There are just some aspects I don't think we should bring in and label as a SIG project. Handling tokens on HTTP, for instance. I don't think we should have a server that does that. I'd like to see it fixed before we bring it in as a SIG project.
So I agree with that completely.
Yeah, so the points are definitely legit. I think I wasn't there as it was created, but as far as I understood it, it was more like some kind of prototype that was created, had huge success, and kind of overlived its expected prototyping weekend where it was developed. So it needs a little bit of love and care. So I completely agree with that.
Yeah, it's not a recrimination of what's there. It's just before I label it a cube SIG project, I think that should be addressed.
That seems reasonable. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments?
I'm sorry, David, do you want me to take a look at the proxy bit now, or was there change that you wanted to see go in before I looked at it?
I don't know what change is needed. So there's a significant checklist. I bet it's going to take a few weeks for Christoph to get through it anyway. But before we say, yep, it's a cube SIG project, I think we need to know what that does.
Can you, or can someone tag me on the particular links or items that you were looking for eyes
Sure.
on? Thanks.
David, feel free to tag me as well.
Sure.
Find it.
If we both look with one eye, Mo, then when that eye starts bleeding, we'll both have one good eye left.
Yeah.
Proxy code. Every time I look at anything touching proxy code, my brain goes into slow motion.
Yep. As an aside, I see there needs to be test coverage. Christoph, this is for you. Please test with both HTTP1 and HTTP2 by themselves, because the way the transports work in the standard library for those are completely different. And I have found CVE in proxies that only work on HTTP1. So just be careful.
I will make a note, or you can comment on the issue.
Yes, I can comment here.
Perfect.
All right. I think that was the last item in the agenda. Let's see, links for specific stuff to review. A few minutes. Does anybody else have anything before I open the late stuff?
This probably should have gone up in the announcements, but 124 is planning to cut next week, and the schedule for 125 is a draft schedule is up. Let me drop a link in. I'll put it up in your announcements. 125 draft schedule. So if you want to take a look at that, if you have things you're wanting to do in 125, take a look and see if those dates make sense. And if not, either adjust your expectations or comment on the proposed schedule. It looks like, well, there's still a lot of discussion there, so I'm not actually sure how close that is to being finalized. But
Okay, so enhancements freeze is in June, beginning of June.
yeah, so it's basically 4 weeks after 124 release.
That's better than I thought. I thought enhancements freeze would be 1 week, like week 3 instead of week 4. So that's nice.
Anyway, that's keep an eye on that. And if, as always, if you want to get stuff into 125, the earlier you have designs and things up, the better the chances.
That actually reminds me. So I think Rita and myself and some others are going to try to have a KMS enhancement for 125. We'll see if that lands or not. But are there other SIG-Auth initiatives? Like obviously we talked about pod security, and I know the service account stuff is a process and is being processed.
Yeah, the token tracking, enabling the token tracking bits, like the tracking of auto-generated token use is the main thing for 125 for that piece.
So does anyone else have anything else that they are trying to get in that would need reviews and approvals and such? Cool. I might just give everyone their 5 minutes back. It's been a long day. So unless anyone desperately wants to look at test flakes and CI, I'm just gonna say that's good enough for today. All right, cool. So we'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Yeah.
See you.